Once upon a time, every good story begins that way, don't you know? Once upon a time, I decided I needed to lose some weight. Now, I knew I was carrying too much weight. I knew it every time I went up and down the stairs. I really knew it. I knew it to the point where I would make my own, I don't want to call them fat jokes, but they were kind of in that vein. I would make my own jokes about my weight just in case someone else was thinking about making one. I knew I needed to lose some weight. So I decided, I committed, I resolved to lose weight. I knew even what I would do. I was truly committed. I would cut out the fast food. I would cut out snacks. I would get a little bit more exercise. I had it all figured out. And those of you who have been with me here in this parish, or with whom I have been in this parish over the last few years, you know what happened, right? Right. I didn't lose a single pound. Because the moment I'm describing to you happened in January 2017, 3 or so years ago. And I didn't lose any weight in 2017. If anything, I gained weight. And I didn't lose any weight in 2018 either, nor in the first part of 2019 as well. Now, eventually, my story has a happy ending. But it really does, as a story, go to the heart of what we're going to be talking about the next few weeks, because commitments and the reasons we keep them or fail to keep them are part of life, and an important part of life at that. And the tension between the two is never really all that far away from us. Think about it. Marriage, family, work. There are many commitments that are part of our lives. There are many commitments we need to fulfill. Life asks a lot of us. And church can fall into that category as well, because spiritual commitments are part of life also. At least they can be, and I'm going to argue here, they should be. I think Jesus might even go a little bit further, but I'll argue that they should be. We're beginning a brand new message series today, and it's a series that we are calling Staying Power. And the title itself, in the context that I've just set for it, probably will help you understand what it's going to be about, but I'm going to go even a little bit further and give you the bottom line, what I think is probably the bottom line for today's message and for the whole series. And it is this truth. We grow spiritually by the commitments that we make and keep. This is a series about how to grow in your faith and as a follower of Jesus Christ, and to keep growing as a follower of Jesus Christ, because there's no end point in this world. If we are alive, we can grow in faith. That's the point of this series. But you might be thinking, spiritual commitments, I'm already committed, I'm overcommitted as a matter of fact. Why would I want to add any more commitments? And why does spiritual growth matter anyway? I believe in God, I go to church, or I watch the live stream most of the time anyway. I pray when I think about it. I'm a good person. Isn't that enough? Well, we'll be arguing that that's not really the primary question. We're going to be talking and suggesting that without a commitment to growing spiritually, the one who is injured is you. I injure myself by not making a commitment to grow spiritually. I place myself at a disadvantage. Think about it. Spiritual growth does many things. It empowers you. It empowers you to identify your purpose and to accomplish what God has created you to do. You might remember us talking in the last series about the reality and the truth that God has a plan for your life. There is a purpose for your life. Well, spiritual growth enables you to attain that purpose. Spiritual growth also enables you to become the best version of you, and we all want that, don't we? Spiritual growth enables you to do that. Spiritual growth also encourages you. It encourages you to love the people around you the way that you want to love them, but you don't always manage to do. Spiritual growth also equips you. It equips you to love and care for yourself in a way that's not selfish, but selfless. In fact, your most important objective in life really is to grow spiritually, because it can so positively impact every other area, every other aspect of your life, including your marriage, your kids, your relationships, your career. All of these can be blessed and benefit from spiritual growth. That is why we should be open to and interested in spiritual growth. But being open to growth just like being open to losing weight, is not enough. There is that second part. And the second part is the crucial part. Anyone can be open to growth. To actually grow, you've got to make a commitment and keep it. That's why we're calling this series Staying Power. We grow spiritually by the commitments we make and keep. Staying power is absolutely necessary for spiritual growth because there are obstacles to growing spiritually. Let's face it, some days, many days, everything in the world, everything in your life feels more urgent, more real, more pressing than your spiritual life. I'm sure you've had that experience. I have, and I'm a priest. Everything gets in the way of making any kind of spiritual commitment. Everything conspires against us. Our busyness, our responsibilities, all of those things. And so we're challenged. And the rest of the world could care less. Think about it. Every day we are inundated with information in one form or another from one source or another, all of it communicating to us, telling us to do this, telling us to do that, encouraging us to lose weight, to get in shape, to buy the new car, to get the latest fashions, to take that vacation that we've always dreamed of. We're encouraged to do all of these things. Meanwhile, nobody is encouraging you to grow spiritually. That is not even a category in our culture and in our media. We're challenged. And there are other challenges. The simple reality, the simple truth is it takes time to grow spiritually. In the same way that you cannot accomplish anything worthwhile in the rest of your life quickly, you cannot microwave your way to spiritual maturity. There are no shortcuts or silver bullets to becoming the person God created you to be, the best version of yourself. There are no shortcuts. Spiritual maturity, in other words, requires a long obedience in the same direction. Obedience to those commitments and to the Lord. So we're going to take some time in the next few weeks and today to look at all of this. And today, what we're going to do is to examine it in the light of the gospel that we heard from Matthew. All this fall, we're digging into the Gospel of Matthew, and it is in Matthew and in Luke where we find most of the parables, the stories that Jesus used to teach his friends and followers, and by which he still strives to teach you and I. Once again today, we heard a parable that Jesus used to describe the kingdom of heaven. That's a reference to Christ's rule, Christ's reign on earth and in our lives, and to the blessings, the many blessings that flow from Christ as King. And in this case, today, Jesus is telling his parable to the religious and spiritual leaders who were opposed to him. So he spoke to them in parables, the gospel told us, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son." Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a big party, a celebration given by a famous person. And this sense of the kingdom, life with God as a party, is one that Jesus uses over and over again, and it's found even in the Old Testament, as we heard in that first reading. Very often, we think or fear committing to spiritual growth, to spiritual exercises, because it strikes us, and we've been told, that it's kind of a dour, depressing piece of hard work. Spiritual life, spiritual exercises have been described by some as boring and bad. That was never the way Jesus saw it. That was never the way Jesus described it. Instead, rather, he chose to compare the spiritual life, growing in the spiritual life, to a party. When we talk about spiritual growth, what we're talking about is learning to identify and enjoy the good things that God has in store for us right now, to be able to see the blessings that he has for us, and to be able to develop the right character to be able to do that, to be able to recognize and then to receive, because even seeing isn't always the same as receiving. To develop the right character to recognize and receive God's gifts. Anyway, back to the gospel. As in our own culture, weddings in Jesus' time were a very big deal, perhaps even bigger a bigger deal than they are today. Then as now, people would tend to make them a priority on their social calendar, and they were usually willing even to travel or to spend money to be part of one. They were a big celebration. Perhaps they loomed even larger because in the culture of Jesus' day, there just weren't a lot of other forms of celebration and entertainment. Most of the people, most of the time, were caught up in the daily drudgery of their daily routine. Even more so than us, because we've got technology and other things to lighten some of that burden, but they had none of that. So the idea of a big feast and celebration was really very attractive. And a wedding feast, as we heard in the story today, thrown by a king, would obviously be the greatest, the grandest of all celebrations in the life of the community. Everyone would want to be part of it. All of which is to say that when Jesus sets up this story, the image he presents, and it may not strike us this way from our own time, the image that he's presenting is of a dazzling and irresistible opportunity, one that anyone would do anything to be part of. A dazzling opportunity. Except that's not what happens. We are told he sent his servants to summon the invited guests to the feast, but they would not come. Some translations say they paid no attention. They simply ignored the invitation. Now, contrasting those two, the dazzling, irresistible opportunity and the paying no attention, it's important for us to recognize in that contrast just how unlikely are the scenarios that Jesus presents us in the parables. They are so unlikely, especially in the context of their day, that those listening to them might very well have laughed aloud when Jesus told them. It's ridiculous. A fantastic, wonderful party. Not interested. No, thank you. But the king doesn't give up. The second time he sent the servants, saying, "Tell those invited, look, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet." You don't want to miss this celebration. But they made light of it. The gospel continues, and went away, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. It's really getting ridiculous now. This is absurd. But what this story is actually is an allegory, which means a story in which all of the characters and details represent something else, something similar but different, something from real life. And in this case, in this story, Jesus is summing up the history of Israel and how they historically had ignored God's invitation and God's blessings and mistreated his servants, the prophets. The story continues. The king, undeterred with this ingratitude and hostility, perseveres in his desire to throw a party, a great party, for his son, and fill that party with guests. So we read, the king said, "The wedding is ready, but those invited are not worthy." The servants then went out into the streets and gathered all they found, both good and bad. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. Those invited were not worthy to come because they ignored and rejected the invitation. They made themselves unworthy by their indifference and hostility to the invitation. It's not a judgment imposed by God, it's their judgment. In order to fill the feast, the servants go out, as we heard, and invite anyone they can find. They bring in both good and bad alike. They don't discriminate in any way. Everyone is invited to the banquet. So the good news at this point in the story is the party is finally full. But then there's the twist at the end that we heard, a real turn of events. When the king came in to meet the guests, we heard, he saw a man there who did not dress in a wedding garment. He said to him, "Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding robe?" And he was speechless. Now the implication here is that the king not only would have provided the feast for his guests, but he also would have provided wedding clothes, a robe in one translation, just like party favors today. This was, in fact, actually a bit of a custom among the elite in that place and at that time. It would have been necessary, practically speaking, for the banquet of which Jesus is talking, because the people who came were simply brought in off the street. They would never have had a chance to prepare otherwise. So he provides the robe. But evidently, this one particular guest refused to put it on. And so our story ends sadly. Then the king said to the attendants, "Bind him hand and foot, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." I guess you could say he's disinvited from the party. Was it because the king didn't like the way he looked? No, it was because he refused to put in any effort whatsoever to participate in the feast. He refused to commit to the party. He was, in the language of our time, a consumer. He came to receive. He came as a consumer, and he stayed a consumer without any commitment. And without any commitment, he doesn't really belong at the banquet. God sends us an invitation too, to be part of his kingdom on earth, to be part of what he is already doing around us, even now. God is working in our community and in the wider community. He wants us to be part of it, and he even offers us the grace, a share in his life, to do that, to accept the invitation and to grow spiritually. He gives us that gift. But grace, God's gift, is not opposed to our own effort. In fact, in the language of the theology of the church, grace builds on our human nature. It builds on our effort and our cooperation with God's gifts. Grace ultimately then requires effort if it's going to be fruitful in our lives and in our world. And as a church, we want to help you to do what you can to live as a follower of Christ and to grow as a follower of Christ. Remember, if you're alive, you are growing, please God, in the spiritual life. So, over the next few weeks, we're going to look at the commitments that we think are vital for spiritual growth. And those spiritual commitments are serving, we've talked about that, tithing and giving to the kingdom, engaging in a small group in Christian community, practicing prayer and sacraments, and sharing your faith. Our faith grows as it is shared. These are the commitments that we want to help you make and keep in order to grow. Now, they are not new. It's not like I've suddenly come up with some brand new secret recipe that's going to do all of this for you. Many of you will recognize most, if not all of them. We are going to be talking about each of them in more detail over the course of this series, but as I said, not all at once. And we're not asking anyone to take them all up at once either. It is discipleship, a step-by-step process. It's a journey. And there isn't a necessary order to the particular steps that we take. Everyone follows a different path. That's just reality. Really, the only step we want you to take today is to commit to this series, because today is just the first week. So, commit to this series. I ask you, I implore you, commit to this series. If you're not going to be here in person for one reason or another, or because of the situation with COVID, make sure to join us online. We stream our 11 a.m. Mass, this very Mass, every Sunday, and we post a recording of the Mass and this message on our website, usually the same day. So you'll have lots of opportunity to follow along, to fulfill that commitment that you make to this series. Come to the celebration. We're all invited to the party. And the good news is, you can come as you are. You can come as you are. You're just not supposed to stay that way.